So there goes. Now we should be on Facebook and on YouTube right now.
All right.
Which means I'm going to open up that link and see. There it is. I'm live on Facebook.
Hey. Hey, interwebs.
It's weird. I'm watching it live on the Facebook page and watching myself talk like it's weird. And everything is behind. So all right, my food is done. I'm good.
Yum. You feel nourished?
I do indeed. I wish I knew how to find this on our YouTube page. I don't have any idea. Oh, there we go. And share a link. And we'll share it on YouTube also. Okay. I think that is. What's up, everybody? We have 6 viewers. So hello to our 6 viewers. Oh, here you go. I'm not sure if anyone recognizes this name.
Steven, how's it going?
That one's for you, Dr. Austin.
Hello, Miss Tamika. That's family.
What's up, family? You know, friends of the pod. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So we are just waiting to get started. My co-host is running a couple minutes behind. You know, you can never trust our people to be on time with nothing. So you know what I'm saying?
We're just reinforcing stereotypes. Come on,
expose these folks, please.
The first live show, you got
right.
Expose them.
Opportunity to break down stereotypes, but
trying to set a precedent here, and everybody he's just gonna be late. You know. Oh man, I am looking forward to this episode a lot.
Same.
This is gonna be. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So,
and it's gonna be great because you both have so much experience in the realms of education that this is really, you know, and it's something that people just need to hear. And it's you know, different voices. Cheney and I, you know, I have my bachelor's degree, and I teach at a high school. So of course I see education from my perspective. And then Cheney's a student at the New York Film Academy in New York. So, you know, he's got it from a different perspective, as well as being Puerto Rican and how that kind of, you know, so it's just, you know, trying to get all viewpoints of something I feel is really important. So I'm excited. Cheney. I'm gonna send him a picture and tell him we've been live for 3 minutes and he's still not here.
Actually, almost 4.
Listen, this man's a slacker. He's really. I will just introduce to the people that are here. Sorry again, my co-host is running a couple minutes behind. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you to Dr. Pickering and Dr. Austin for joining. But this is the beginning of a series that I'm beginning for Black History Month. I don't know where the inspiration came from, but I knew February was coming, and I just had this feeling that there were people and voices and topics that needed to be heard in the present age. And so, you know, this is a series that's going to be featuring guests every episode live, hopefully on Saturdays. We're talking about race in various aspects of our life. So today's episode is focused entirely around education. Next week, I believe we are talking with a former military serviceman and talking about race in the military. And he's also a businessman. Nissan is on the show on the 20th. So I'll be meeting with him and we'll be talking about race kind of in that sports world as well as
Yeah.
the fitness world and entrepreneurship and what that looks like. And then I have a friend of mine from my undergrad who is an actress in the theater world. And so we've done an episode already where we talked with the director of the Community Theater League in Williamsport. But this is more he still does acting, but this is more from an actor's perspective. And he's not a minority, so it's just a whole other perspective. So this series is one that I'm really excited for.
Yeah.
And just I think is really important. This man, Cheney. We're losing our viewers. Cheney, hurry up. He's not a minority, so
I just pulled it up.
And now he's dipping my calls.
Oh my God.
You're being ghosted.
Seriously.
Thank you, Senor Nieves. What's up, Nate? How you doing, man? Thanks for joining. All right, let's get started, and Cheney can jump in when he gets here. Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of AfroLatinos. This is your co-host, Aubyn. My co-host, Chandler, is running a couple minutes late, so he's going to jump in here in just a second. But this week starts the series, as I said, which is all about Black History Month. We're supporting Black voices, Black lives, and all of the above, and all of that entails. And so today's episode is focused entirely around race in the field of education. I, as an educator, feel that this is something super important. And so I have brought some phenomenal guests with me today. On the show, we have Dr. Cyril Pickering and Dr. Kristin Austin. What's up, guys?
Hey.
How you doing?
Thank you so much for joining us. I will let you two decide, but let the audience know who you are, where you come from, and all that jazz. So whichever would like to begin, please go ahead.
Go ahead, Dr. Austin.
Oh, thank you. Okay, hello. Hi, my name is Kristin Austin, and I am a higher education educator. I have been in higher education for, there he is.
Hello, Chandler. This is everyone. This is the co-host
There
Cheney.
he is.
Hello. Sorry I'm late.
We shall shame you.
More for wearing that Patriots sweatshirt than for.
Oh man, it's
I'd
rough
say
out here, Cheney.
I'd say I'd take it off, but I'm not going to.
Honesty is the best policy.
So Cheney, Dr. Austin was just, or Kristin. I don't know what you want me to, I'm trying to give your title, but I don't know. Kristin is telling our viewers who she is. So now you get to know, since this is your first time meeting her also.
Yeah. So professionally, my professional title would be Dr. Kristin Austin, Representation Matters. So of course, in certain spaces, I like to use that, but I'm just Kristin from the block. And I am a higher education educator and a solopreneur. So I do own a small business called KE Advancement Inc. It's a poly-interest firm that helps individuals advance to their next level of knowledge, career, or education. My passion areas is transformational pedagogy, so really inclusive curricula, and then I really am into inclusionary conversations, and I love college students. So that's it.
And I am Dr. Cyril Pickering.
You better.
You all can call me what my mom calls me, Dr. Pickering. And no, just Cyril. I am a school psychologist. I got one of my cohort mates joining. How's it going, Dr. Jacobson? School psychologist in Washington, D.C., charter schools, originally from Staten Island, New York, hence the Patriots' hatred. Got my master's and PhD. Got my bachelor's degree from Bucknell University, master's and PhD from University of Maryland, College Park. Been down in the DC area for the past 10 years, mainly working in schools, first in Alexandria, Virginia, now in Washington, DC. My focus is on doing, school psychology in a way that is different, that is directed at the needs of the students. So my big focus is helping to develop a social emotional learning program for students who are at risk, to help build a connection with school so that they can benefit from what they're getting in the classroom. Right now working in a middle school, which is everyone's favorite group of kids, and it's never a dull moment.
I have a middle schooler, so
they really are a blast to work with.
I cannot even imagine, as I was telling Cyril and I were talking a little bit before the show started, my fiance wants to be a middle school English teacher. That is what she is studying at Bloomsburg, Kristin, our old stomping grounds. But listen, that age is a special breed, and it takes a special breed of people to be able to work with it. I don't think I would survive my career if I was teaching anything less than high school. So, this conversation today is all about race in the field of education. And so we'll start with Dr. Pickering, since Dr. Austin began the show. So Cyril, what are your experiences? Especially, I'm interested to hear your voice because, you work in more of an inner city location. Hey, what's up, my man? Look at little Cal. What's up, Calvin? He definitely doesn't even remember me, but that's all right. So Cyril, talk to us a little bit about your background in education as a student or as a professional. What does that look like for you, especially being in more of an inner city location? How does your job change depending on location, and what drew you to your field? All of the above.
Yeah, so I grew up in New York City public schools. My mom is an educator. She was a English teacher for a long time. Now retired and enjoying her retirement. I grew up actually not liking school all that much. I was one of those students who just really didn't connect with it. Not because difficulty of content, just for whatever reason it didn't really click. I grew up around a lot of people who were just not really connected with school, who didn't really take things seriously. And later on down the line, through high school, college, grad school, something clicked with me, and something made me realize that for a lot of students who are disenfranchised, who are living in difficult situations, for a lot of them, education is a starting point, a jumping off point, and a tool to get out of their situations. And if they're having difficulty academically, school is not a rewarding place for them. It's not a place where you can go to feel rewarded, to feel uplifted. My journey through school psychology was a little bit different because a lot of school psychologists are the gatekeepers to special education. So that is what a lot of people's experiences with psychologists within the school are. And I felt kind of dissatisfied by that. Luckily, I was able to find myself through a long winding road, quitting grad school and then coming back, and having a lot of people helping me along the way connect with places who are doing things in a different way, who are deploying their mental health services in a way that really looks at the needs of the students and finds out how to connect them with school. My dissertation research was on student resiliency, looking at the way students have a sense of personal mastery, their ability to think of themselves as being capable, and their sense of relatedness, their connection with resources, and feeling like they have people behind them who are helping them. And that's kind of like the model that I take into my work every day. In education, one of the phrases is you got to look at Maslow first. Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Right.
leads you into Bloom's taxonomy. So Maslow before Bloom. Before you can learn, you have to meet the needs of the students. One of the things that I try to encourage in students is the things that you're learning them for a reason. So find ways to connect what sometimes might be dry academic content to project down 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and connect that with what you want to do. And I think that's incumbent on educators to help students make that connection.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's one of the things that, as educators, when we go through school, we're told like a million times. I mean, the number of times that I was told Bloom's taxonomy and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's something you never really think about, because a lot of times I think we think, as a teacher, my job is to teach the person, and all I'm there for. I think sometimes some of us think this way at times, and I think it happens in every field, but a lot of us think my job is to, if I'm a math teacher, I'm going to give you this math, right? I'm going to give you these worksheets. I'm going to give you these formulas because you're going to need it. But in order for us to learn, as Maslow says, they need to feel welcome. They need to feel safe. They need food. They need water. They need all of these things. They need to feel loved. And so, we can't just teach content to an empty classroom, because we're teaching people, and people have feelings, and people have emotions, and people go through things. And so, if you're not feeling safe, if all that's in your mind is, am I going to eat today? Am I going to have a warm bed to sleep in? Is my mom going to be home when I get home? Is my parent going to be there? If that's what's on my mind, why do I care about what you're going to, why do I care about the polynomials and factoring? That doesn't mean anything to me, because I have other things that I need to focus on. And so we need to remember, I think so many times as educators, that our job is teaching people first and content second. And so I love that, Cyril, that's kind of what your focus is on, and building those relationships and those connections with people, because I just think that that's super important. Dr. Austin, would you like to share your background and experiences?
So, of course I would. My educational background has been privileged. So I always like to start with that. It has been very privileged, and privilege is unearned. It was an environment and a family that I was born into. So I had a very appropriate and mobile and accessible private education a lot growing up. And then I also had very accessible, mobile, and highly resourced public school education growing up. So I had access to a lot of capital, knowledge capital, and resource capital. What are you doing? Goodness, Galen, I can't see. And that allowed me to go to college. So I went to Bloomsburg undergrad. I got my master's degree at a school called Edinburgh University, and then got my doctorate at a school called Immaculata University. And I really chose those experiences very strategically, because I wanted to have exposure to a lot of different institutional types, especially because I knew I was going to be working with a variety of student types. So I first and foremost just acknowledged the privilege that played into my education, the things that were very naturally afforded to me that were not perhaps afforded to others. So even talking about Maslow, where I was able to enter the pyramid, for example, was so much higher than where other individuals have been able to hire or have been able to enter and operationalize that pyramid. But one of your questions was like, what are some of the differences between education and settings and districts and places? I'm going to shout out funding. Just start there. Funding. And I know, Dr. Pickering, you're not in Pennsylvania, but in case any of the viewers don't know, Pennsylvania has the least equitable funding system out of all 50 states. So the funding that is diverted toward public education, as opposed to, or when comparing it with public education in economically secure districts is highly, highly, highly unbalanced. There's a lot of legislation on the docket right now about that in Pennsylvania. So I'm hoping that a lot of the lobbying is going to make some changes there, because it really starts with resources. I had a mentor in grad school who said, a system's priority by where they spend their money. And so where our government chooses to invest its financial resources is highly, highly underfunded as it relates to education. And that's not only K through 12, but also at the higher ed level. Our public system, which is called the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. It's a consortium of 14 institutions, also highly underfunded. So we can do a lot more. We can provide a lot of those physiological needs and things that both of you are talking about and have seen deficits in, if we had more funding and support to do so. We haven't had it. So we find ourselves filling in the gaps and trying as hard as possible to meet those needs. But things cost money, and we just have to call a thing a thing. It's not enough to be a passionate, talented teacher, because passionate, talented teachers, their kids need braces too. So their kids need food as well. Hi. So yeah, that's my answer to that. A little bit about my educational journey. I think I'd be remiss to not provide context of the lens that I'm coming from. I think that's really important.
I'm on the call.
Yes, you are, Callan. Thank you for joining us, buddy. So, what was the point in your life that either, and this question is to you both, but what was the point in your life that you knew, I want to help students, or that I want to make a difference in the lives of students? Or why were you drawn to education? What was that point for you?
Yeah, I think for me, it was somewhere around, I think college was a big turning point for me just in general. I've always been fascinated with psychology, and even from, I think the Michael Crichton book, The Sphere, one of the characters is a psychologist, like, oh, that is super fascinating. But it was when I went to college and the opportunity to explore different jobs, where I took a couple of different subjects, took a couple of education courses, and was able to put the pieces together. Was able to see kind of the importance of intervention on that ground level. I always knew that there were students kids who I grew up with, who didn't get the opportunities that they deserved a lot of the times. And I did. There were things that my parents were on the lookout for, opportunities for me to sign up for, that a lot of parents just didn't have that access to because they didn't have the knowledge for that. So if you want to help on the ground level, you want to help kids, you go where the kids are. You go in the schools and get in wherever you could fit in. For me, it was, how can I use this interest in psychology to help students on a daily basis? And I kept digging until I found a school, a job, a role where I can do that. And the fit is important to me, and I've always looked at schools where I could be that member of the community, where the face-to-face time with students is more than it would be if I were in a place where the psychologist is assigned to 5 different schools and they're going around from place to place to place. I've seen districts like that, and I have a list of places where I know I'm not going to work for that county. Won't name any names right here because we need more school psychologists in general. But it was around college where the pieces got put together, and I saw kind of where I wanted to direct myself.
And did you ever feel like you did not belong in your work? Were there other school psychologists in your time, in your educative process that looked like you, that sounded like you, that shared similar experiences with you? or did you ever feel like you were the only one in your field at the time, or even in your current position? Are you the only one, the only minority school psychologist in your area in the everything related to, I just have a question for you also, Cyril. Shortly, well, you can answer this in a little bit.
Yes. I will get to that, because there's being in DC. That's a big a big thing.
Sure it is.
To your question, Aubyn, graduate school, it was an interesting time for me, because psychology in general is a female dominated field. A couple of the people who are in my cohort, I saw them in the chat. Hello, Jill and Megan. We had a lot of great experiences together. And one of the things that I loved about the program is that everybody came into it with different experiences, with different passions. And there's a sort of ground level things that every psychologist should be able to do. The assessment, consultation with teachers, but each one of us took our passions into different places. For me, one of the things that I started out in Alexandria, Virginia, as I mentioned, and I was a little hesitant. I did my internship in a school in Washington, D.C., where they did have this alternative model, and I was hesitant going into what I considered to be a suburban school, because I feel like there are a lot of people whose skill sets fit better for a more traditional school psychologist role. I was glad to see that there were students who had the same sorts of needs that you would find in a urban Washington, D.C. School, because that's where I felt that my skills and my passions fit best. I was one of just a few male school psychology students in my program, and it was one of a few students of color, and I think that the mentoring I got along the way really pushed me to follow after that passion. It really pushed me to notice things like that. What's the racial makeup of the classroom? What's the racial makeup of the teaching staff, and how does that impact the way that teachers interact with students? I give kudos to my program, because it caused me to have my eyes open to questions like that, even if the program wasn't as diverse as you might find at, say, Howard University, which has a school psychology program as well. It's a method of teaching you how to think, not just this is the way things are typically done.
Wow. Kristin, the same question to you. In your experiences, where did you feel like you fit in? And I know there's so many questions. And to the people who are asking questions on Facebook and on YouTube, we are going to get to those questions. I promise. I'm putting people's comments in and out of the stream, but we'll save questions specifically for the end. We'll save some time to address those questions so that we don't break up the flow of conversation. So, Kristin, can you share your experiences as an educator, as a Black educator, as a Black woman educator? The more you start to tag on our identities that we all share and we find our differences, I think that we start to see, different ways that we feel. So can you share your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. So I realized, I always knew that I wanted to, I think the original question was, when did you know you wanted to help students?
Yeah.
And so I'll blend that through this whole narrative. When I entered college, I entered as a deaf interpreting major because I thought that I wanted to be a professional interpreter, which is an amazing and very rewarding career. But as I was in the college space, I found that I wanted something that was a little bit more interactive for me. So something, and I'm going to say something that sounds really selfish, but then I'll unpack it. I actually needed something that centered me more, because I am at my best when I'm influencing. So a lot of people want to sound very humble and say like, it's not about me, it's about everyone else. That's fine. That's a really great way to be, but you also have to know where your gifting is. And I know that being in spaces where I have influence and an audience is an area of opportunity to be impactful. So sign language wasn't aligning with that really, but I still do love the language. So then I bounced from education, from being an education major, to which my mom loved because she is a retired educator. But I realized like, no, I cannot deal with education either. And then I landed in social work, which was a perfect fit because it really is rooted and grounded in the helping profession, the helping skill set. And that's where I wanted to be. So weaving through all of that, and then I landed because we're talking about race specifically, I want to emphasize how my racial identity did not influence any of those experiences. When I was in college, race was not my salient identity, none whatsoever. I wasn't in a position where it had to be because I was very used to moving and operating and thriving in a predominantly white environment. So I was very comfortable at the campus that I went to. I actually didn't. I won't say I wasn't as tuned in to the Black student community. I just wasn't as tuned into it because it wasn't my salient identity. It wasn't that I was Black, but it just wasn't my salient identity. I would say in the undergrad experience, my faith, being a Christian, was my salient identity. That's what really drove so many of the decisions I made and my decision to go into education. And then to put a bow on that, it actually was the mentors that I had that gave me the lens of higher education. So there was an individual at Bloomsburg named Dr. Irvin Wright who was very invested in my success and my education. And I found myself wanting to emulate the impact that he had on students. And that is what drove my path. Later on, though, as I've gone through education, and now I can talk about those other identities, I definitely went on a self-actualization journey of my Blackness and my womanness. Definitely found and carved out those identities to really understand and be able to articulate what it means to be Black, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a Black woman, what it means to be a Black Christian woman, Black Christian mom, Black Christian wife, like all these different intersectioning identities that really have shaped my experience as an educator. I'm constantly thinking of each of those different lenses, and they really make a difference. But I really wanted to highlight that our identities, our salient ones, really do come and go in our lives. And as it relates to education, as educators dealing with race in education, we have to make sure that we are addressing students at their salient identity. And that's so important because sometimes it's not centering a child's race or ethnicity is less important than centering the fact that they're a Muslim or centering the fact that they have a disability. We really have to see what is their operating environment in that moment or in that school year and really address our attention there. We want to make sure and be careful that we're not hyper focusing on just race. It's so important, right? So important. But my own experience in education has taught me that the identities kind of ebb and flow about what's most salient. So yeah, that's what I have to offer that.
And I think that is such an important point also, because as I think back to my journey and if you've listened to previous episodes, we've talked a lot about our personal identities on this show, specifically racial and ethnic identities. And Cheney and myself, Cheney was born in Puerto Rico. So, for him, being Puerto Rican is a big part of his life and who he is. And that's driven a lot of where he comes from and a lot of the way that he processes information. And for me, Kristin, like yourself, I've grown up for the majority of my life here in Milton, Pennsylvania. There are not, or were not prior to the last, 10 years or so, there were not a lot of people in my high school, middle school, elementary school that looked like me and that talk. And so I found that my identity, like you said, was not focused on race. A lot of what seemed similar to you, Kristin, was, Christian first, and then came everything else. And I just happened to be Black. And then there's been this whole process over the last, I would probably say, since graduation, being in college, where I tried to figure out what that identity means to me. And that's where the show comes from. That's where a lot of the topics that we talk about come from, is discovering and loving who I am and tapping into that. And then also allowing myself the opportunity to use that, whereas I did not use it because I was blended into the background. I was a straight A, for the most part, straight A student. I fit in with everyone else. I was just like everyone else. And so I never, race was never the focal point of my career in my high school career. And then, even in education in college at Bloomsburg, I wasn't focused on the fact that I was a Black educator. In my head, I was an educator and I was just a teacher. And it wasn't actually until, I don't know whether that was me just trying to, use my Blackness as like a one-up in the application field. but when I applied at Shikellamy, I noticed the population of Sunbury and noticed how racially and ethnically diverse the population was. And I realized that not only do I want to teach, but I want to be somewhere where I am teaching people who look and sound and talk and walk similar to the way that I do. Because I think so many times, and this is going to go a little bit off from the education perspective, just a tiny bit, and just focus on race. I think a lot of times in pop culture, especially in the media portrayal of Blackness, we are only ever allowed to be certain things. We are either, for the most part, we're slaves. That's the first story that is always told whenever we talk about Blackness, is slaves first. We always talk about the traumatic experience that is Blackness, and never the amazingness that it was all of these Black people who have done all of these great things over their lives. And so when I look at movies, when I look at music, and I see, we were either in the civil rights era or we were slaves. And that's pretty much the only, or we're criminals. And that's pretty much athletes and musicians. That's pretty much all that we get to be. We're put into those boxes. And so being an educator, because I had not had a Black teacher until I was in college. My freshman year of college was the first time I'd ever had any teacher who was Black. There was a teacher when I was in middle school, but then she retired, and then there was none. And in my school district, I believe I am one of 3, I think, in my school district. Shout out to Miss Gittins at the high school. But I believe I'm one of 3 Black educators in our entire district. And so for me, that was like, this is what I want to be, to show a positive experience for these Black students who maybe the only times they're ever seeing Blackness portrayed is in the movies, where they're selling drugs, or they only can be athletes. They can only be X, Y, Z. And then I get lucky to also have the ability to identify as Dominican, because for those students who, and their stories are not told, the Hispanic and Latino population, or Latinx population, is often underrepresented in the social sphere also. And so I get to identify with that side of life and get to connect with those students even more because of my personal story. And so that is where, I, as an educator, kind of delve into and just try and connect with those students. And it brings me to a topic focused in education, and one that Cheney and I have talked about. Cheney, you have something that you want to add? Go ahead, jump in.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Okay. Now that you mentioned that about they don't teach a lot of Spanish stuff for Hispanics and all that stuff, I realized I haven't been in Puerto Rico since 2010, so I haven't learned much since then. And like, they don't teach us much about like any of that stuff here, unless like maybe you have Spanish class, and and I wasn't allowed to take it. Like, they didn't let me. They gave me a French class, and I was like, okay, cool, but that's not what I wanted. So I think it would have been cool if I would have had that chance.
And Cheney, a lot of that, and your experience and our experiences in general, I believe as a whole, are very similar in that our stories are only told at very specific times. For the majority of especially high school, and I can only speak to my perspective as a high school teacher, but I believe in a lot of spaces, the only times you hear Black stories are right now in February. It's like you hear about everything, you hear Civil War, World War II, all of these that are and you hear what predominantly white heroes. General Colin Powell gets snuck in there sometime when you talk about Desert Storm. We get our people every now and again, but then February comes and we get 4 weeks where we get to be the focal point and we get all eyes on us, which is for a lot of us not where we want our attention to be. I know I did not. I had one kid one time. I had 2 negative experiences that made me feel Black in my high school, where like I felt my race. And I had one, I don't remember why. I walked into a classroom in a middle school. This was in 7th grade. I walked into one of the classrooms. Their classroom was being rowdy. We were trying to learn. I happened to be sitting in the back of the classroom. And at that time, the 4 classrooms were all connected. And you just had like a little opening that you could walk around to each class. And I had one student, I walked in the room because my teacher asked me to, and this kid looked at me and he said, "Get to the back of the bus." And for the first time, this was middle school, I was like, oh, so this is how you see me, and I'm not even here. I didn't say anything to you. This was unprovoked. I walked in to address the teacher because my teacher asked me to do so. Why are you doing this? Like, what is this? What is this meaning? Like, why? What was that purpose? And then I had another time in high school in my sophomore year where we were talking. This is such a bizarre story. We were talking about Hawaii, and I was a little bit of a nerd in high school, so I just knew a lot of random information. Not that being a nerd is bad at all. I think we all share some tendencies. And so I happen to know a lot of useless information, and our teacher asked us one thing, and I gave an answer, and the kid was like, "Well, of course he knows. He's XYZ." And I did not identify with that race or ethnicity whatsoever. And I was just like, no, I'm just not like dumb and I know stuff. Like, I don't know why, but it was that moment of all eyes are focused on me because I happen to have information that they didn't have. But in their mind, it was because he's Black, he knows Black information, or because he's Black, in this case, he knew another minority of a Hawaiian ethnicity, right? It's just this mind-blowing saga. But Donnie Campbell brings up a good point, and this is again something that we were mentioning. Our stories are told in February or on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Exactly. Our stories are isolated to February or to specific days that are targeted at Black people. And Cheney, for a lot of Hispanics or Latinx people, our story stops at the Spanish-American War. We get conquistadors coming to America and the establishment of America, Christopher Columbus, all of those people in that era, which we know the problem, we ain't gonna go there, but we get that story. And then the Spanish-American War, where we lost Texas and California and Arizona, and that's where our story stops. We never hear of except we also hear in history about the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. But again, that's not good things about our people and our stories. These are all negative, traumatic experiences. And so for a lot of minority students, our stories are told in trauma. And so I think that is something that desperately needs to change and that needs to be focused in curriculum. And I think, Cyril, you had mentioned your focus in curriculum, and if I'm saying this correctly, in that inclusivity. And I think, Kristin, you said something similar to that. So, I mean, it's unfortunate that the education system is set up the way that it is, because I think our stories are just not being heard appropriately.
Yeah. Shout out to Mr. Campbell, one of the finest educators who I've ever worked with. Great math teacher. and really, loves the kids. So shout out to you, Mr. Campbell. I think you make a great point, Aubyn. Who's writing the curriculum?
Mm-hmm.
Who is choosing what figures to focus on? Why do we learn about the French Revolution and not the Haitian Revolution? Why? A lot of
Come on, educator.
a trend that I've seen recently is a lot of students a lot of schools in DC and major urban areas are wanting to introduce a more Afrocentric, a more diverse curriculum into what they're learning, which I am 100% for. I'm fine with. Part of teaching students of color is getting them to see value in who they are, value in those identities that Dr. Austin was talking about. Also, though, I think that we need more diverse representative curricula in central Pennsylvania, in rural Iowa, in all these other places, so that Black history isn't just a punchline. It isn't just a part of the curriculum that we could dispense with once February is over. That seeing the struggle, but the beauty that came out of that struggle. Absolutely. Teach about the Harlem Renaissance. Teach about the great orators that are
Black
able
Wall
to
Street.
Black Wall Street. Teach about those things. A lot of people didn't learn about Black Wall Street until the Watchmen movie. There's a movie coming out, very recently, or very soon, Judas and the Black Messiah, who I think is going to introduce a lot of people to Huey P. Newton and Fred Hampton and the ways that they built up a community, and those communities were disrupted by the government. Why are these things not in the curriculum, not just for students of color, but for all students?
Cheney, is that another hand? Oh,
I was wondering too.
Yeah, I was currently blocking some view over here.
Oh, okay.
Because Ruby's doing something, but it's fine.
We can high five though. I just want to say, so I teach multicultural education. That's one of the classes I teach college students or grad students. And these are students who are going to be classroom educators. And so they come into the class thinking this has been my unanimous experience. They enter the class thinking multicultural education. Okay. This class is going to teach me how to work with, or this class is going to teach me how to get Black and Brown or English language learners to connect with the curriculum. So that's the first thing that we have to debunk, because the onus is not on the students to bend to the curricula. It's on the curricula to automatically include and infuse the students. And so I start there. That's baseline. Like when I say to students, why are you signed up for this class? Other than it being a requirement, what do you think we're going to learn about? And that's always what it is. But we have a curriculum and we need to know how to get the Black, Brown, English language learners to lean in. And so debunk that right away. Second, when I ask the students, what would be your plan for including multicultural education into your different lessons and ideas? Automatically, unanimously, the students will have a lesson plan. At the end, they will add something that has to do with diversity, equity, or inclusion. And then we have to strip that away. And I'm okay with it. That's what learning is for. This is where I want you to make the mistake. So you don't make it with Pedro. You don't make it with Lily in the class. Like, make it here. Okay. And so what I hope that I help them to do is diversity, equity, and inclusion should never, ever be an add-on. Start with that at the top and then build your curriculum from there. So if you're going to do a storybook hour, just make sure, and obviously this is grade specific, but if you're going to read a story, choose a diverse author, choose a book that's in multiple languages, choose a book where the illustrator is a person of an underrepresented identity. I think that individuals that go through teacher preparation programs that are largely whitewashed and largely sterile have wonderful intentions, but have not been taught the appropriate way to provide an inclusive curriculum. Because if we do this right, K through 12, we can get to a point where diversity and inclusion is such a seamless integration. How many months are we in school? 9 months out of the year. That when we have Black History Month and Latino History Month, it's just a celebration versus an education. Because we try to make it an education once a month, and that's just so ineffective. We really could be doing it for the entire school year and then celebrating it. That because we say like celebrate Black history, celebrate women.
Yeah.
We're not celebrating it. We're really educating. That's what we're doing, and we're trying to confine it to that small space. And there was one other thing I was going to say, but it's slipping my mind. Oh, the other reason, when students aren't engaged in class, I tell them, I don't blame you. I don't blame you because the curriculum is dry. The curriculum is boring. I could be the best educator there is, but the curriculum is not engaging. You can't help it. They're not the teacher. They're not the school district. They're not the curricula writer. So they can't help it that school is not enticing, that the walls are white and it feels there's very much a prison industrial complex. They can't help that, but we can. And we can make it so that students see themselves represented throughout their entire K through 12 experience. So they actually feel a part of education rather than, like we said, an add-on at the end. Because if we make them think they don't belong in the education space, then why would they connect with it? Where's the buy-in? Where is the reason for them to get excited to come to school to learn about George Washington when they could learn about George Washington Carver? So there's just such an important, such an intentionality behind education that can really make a huge difference. And it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't even cost a lot. We just have to be willing to do it.
And that brings me to there's so many thoughts going through my head, and that's why this conversation is so interesting and why it was at the forefront of my mind. And a lot of the things that you both have said are things that I think and feel every day. And I'm so glad we get to share this space to be able to share these concerns. Dr. Austin, this is to you. I think that as that we need to also debunk the theory that diversity, if we hear the word diversity, there is a connotation that word carries. And the first thing, if we close our eyes and ask you to describe diversity, your first thought is Black and white. So if I ask you to talk about the diversity of a classroom, you're going to go and look around and see, okay, how many white students do I have? How many Black students do I have? How many brown students do I have? But there is so much more to diversity that doesn't get talked about. You have racial, ethnic diversity. You have socioeconomic status differences. You have gender identity, sexual orientations. You have, political affiliation. You have religious affiliation. Ability and inability. And there is the only thing that we focus on when we talk about diversity is Black or white. And so we need to understand that there is more to that. And so, yes, we need to adjust the curriculum to represent every person at every time, always. And so I did it in my undergrad. I don't remember what course it was, but I remember an exercise that I did when we had to do a little micro teaching unit. And it was our focus. I got lucky because this is a topic I love to talk about, is diversity and diversity issues. I got lucky that one was assigned to me and my group, or whether that was on purpose. I'm not sure. But either way, I was fine with it because it allowed me the opportunity. In the exercise, I had on the screen 4 pictures. One was, I think they were 2 twins. They were both white. They were twins. I had another picture where there was a multi-ethnic, multicultural classroom of various colors, skin tones. And I don't remember what every picture was, but I polled the class. And in that poll, the poll was basically, which picture shows the most diverse classroom or the most diversity? Overwhelmingly, the decision was the one that had the Asian student, the Black student, the white student. And that was their thinking, because their entire lives, all that they've ever heard about diversity was what you look like on the outside. And I said to them something akin to, diversity is everything that makes you you. And so even in the picture of the twins, they are identical twins, yes. They grew up in the same house, yes. They looked like each other, yes. But even inside of each other, there are differences that they cannot possibly share because each individual person and their experiences are going to be different. And so I think that is step one in education, is to really show what diversity is and how beautiful it is when it's addressed appropriately. Last summer during the the protests and Black Lives Matter movements, and there was all this racial tension, it seemed like, in the world, or in the United States. My principal addressed myself and the other Black teacher in the high school and pulled us in for a meeting. And I think that I had two feelings about this. It was one, thank you for seeing me for who I am and respecting my voice. And two, this conversation should have happened probably before now, just because there's things happening. This is not necessarily the time. These problems should be addressed beforehand. But basically, the conversation was, how do we make our school more inclusive to everyone so that, on day one, when we come in, we don't have these concerns where, we have the population of Black students who don't feel like they belong, or why are I think some of the questions that came up in conversation, why are the Hispanic students and the minority students in general, why aren't they participating in school activities? Why do they not feel school pride? And a lot of it simply is because they don't feel like they belong. And so the conversation came about of, how do we make our school a more inclusive environment for all? And we had some really fantastic conversation. I'm so thankful that I was able to share that space and that opportunity to have that conversation, because it made me feel validated that the purpose I felt like why I was at this school and why I was hired at this school was kind of being realized. And so that kind of self-actualization came upon me. And it was like, okay, this is where I want to do. This is where I want to focus. And now COVID has kind of ruined everything that we have tried to do. And, we wanted to, we started a diversity club. That was the initial intention. But again, even in creating a diversity club, we recognized and knew when people hear the word diversity, they're turned off by it because they're going to think, one, this is just for the Black and brown students, or two, this is where we go to berate the white students and why the white students don't matter and that their feelings are not important. And so by the end of things, I made a simple change. Instead of the diversity club, it became You Matter. Because yes, you might be able to say that diversity club is not important because whatever your excuse for that is, but who can really say that you don't matter? And in a You Matter situation, in a place, in a space where everyone knows you matter, everyone's voice can be heard because you matter. And I just feel like this is something that needs to change in every system everywhere, and that this education, again, is so important to be able to change the hearts and minds of young lives. Because if we can get them now, while their minds are still, and even up to the college age, it is much easier to change the minds and thought processes of a younger adolescent brain and as a developing brain than it is to someone who is 40, 50 years old, who has already lived and had their experiences, because that's all they have to draw on. It's so much harder to change those minds. So if we can get them young, we can make a world of difference. All right, that was a long diatribe.
Yeah. and I think without that, it's stifling the people's development. It's causing them to see the world in a truncated way. And it really cascades down into, these are the students who are growing up seeing this world in this one way, are becoming the teachers of the future and don't know how to negotiate that, don't know how to, when they find themselves in a school where there's a large population of Latino students and Latino parents, reflecting on their own practice and asking, what message does it send that all of my emails to parents home are in English, and I'm not making the effort to get paperwork sent home in Spanish. These students who are, from the large population of Ethiopian students here in the DC area, do we have an Amharic translator within the school district that can communicate to parents in a way that they understand? And if we do communicate in their best language, it's sending the message that they matter. It's sending the message that this is a place where you belong, where we're not going to run things by you. We want you to connect to the school. We have to change the way that we think, not just in the classroom, but on an administrative level, on the level of administrators not only allowing but encouraging these kinds of conversations to happen within the class. So, Brian asked about the Black Lives Matter protests. We had a lot of those conversations here in the DC area because my school is a couple miles from the White House where a lot of the protests were happening, and myself and a lot of my coworkers were involved in some of the protests. But places which are farther disconnected from these larger urban areas where it was happening, what conversations are they happening in the classroom? Do those students understand why these protests got sparked? Do they understand the nature of policing in America, and are they able to trace the history of that back to what caused it?
Right. Real quick, Cyril, we're going to continue this conversation. Kristin has to go. She's got some prior commitments. But Kristin, thank you so much for joining. This has been incredible. And we're going to continue the conversation without you. Unfortunately, tune into the live and you can continue with the conversation if you're able. But do you have any parting thoughts before you head out?
Yeah, definitely. I would say anytime you hear that perhaps a curriculum is going to be infusing diversity and inclusion, lean into it. Don't automatically get defensive. I think that a lot of parents and families of privilege get defensive when they hear that suddenly we're going to be adding a district or a school is going to be adding diversity and inclusion into the curricula. But I remind families, sort of to your point, Aubyn, you do want your children to know how to engage with individuals that use assistive technology. You do want your children to know how to engage in a global society. And that's what a diversity and inclusion curriculum really is designed to do. It's not indoctrination. It's awareness building. It's education. And what we do at home as families and parents or caregivers, and I know it's family structures are different everywhere, is to provide education as well. So that's what I would leave everyone with, because it's diversity in education is so important. So yes. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully we can have you back to continue the conversation.
Yes.
And Calvin, we're going to have you back too. All right. All right. Deal.
Pleasure to meet you, Dr. Austin.
Thanks, too. Bye-bye.
All right. Where were we? Is this Dr. Campbell, by the way? Is this the appropriate title, Cyril?
Don't know if you've got your PhD since the last time we talked, Mr. Campbell. But
well, Mr. Campbell, thank you so much for all of your comments. Your conversation is right on with us, and we appreciate you so much. And thank you to everyone else who is commenting and joining in this conversation on Facebook or on YouTube. So I will just pull up the comment again, Cyril, for you to address. Maybe we can just keep going with the conversation. I mean, there's a couple other questions in the chat that I'll bring up also. But the question is, can you speak to the current climate related to Black Lives Matter and impact upon education? So for you specifically, you're going to have a better idea of it for your area being in DC. Can you just readdress really quickly how this has changed or affected your education and the processes behind that education?
Yeah, this is a super fascinating place to work in the Washington, D.C. area, especially this year, but also dating back to kind of the origins of the Black Lives Matter protests, when some of the police violence started to be recorded and started to be nationalized. At the time, around the time of Mike Brown and some of the other incidents that sparked the Black Lives Matter movement, I was working in Alexandria, and I don't think that they had the ability to, at the time, there weren't a lot of resources to be able to engage the students as well as it is now. And some of that, as I mentioned, has to do with the leadership. What kind of emphasis does the leadership put on it? Do they have the boldness to take some time to reflect on the current not trends in society, because it's not a trend, some of the way that the culture is going? When there's a Black Lives Matter week, are they taking it seriously and equipping their teachers who, at the time when I was working in Alexandria, were majority white, giving them resources to be able to talk about it, or is it just a token effort? The school where I am now, in Washington, D.C., there is we do a great job, in my opinion, and not only addressing and pressing our students to think about the Black Lives Matter protests that started years back and are ongoing until now, pressing them to think about the reasons why. What are some of the triggers that caused it to happen? What are some of the historical precedents dating back to not just the civil rights movement, but other initiatives and other movements for freedoms in America and in other countries? Something that very recently, just in the last month, that with the incidents that happened at the Capitol building, me being a DC transplant, I was reflecting on the fact that I'm very much, I've only been down here since 2007. These students' homes. So things that impact their ability to move around due to the things that happened at the Capitol by people who largely came in from outside. Washington, D.C. isn't just a political center. It's the home for a lot of Black and brown people for generations. And their lives are now disrupted, subject to increasing policing. Stat that I just saw this morning was Washington, D.C. is one of the most disproportionate places for Black and brown people, not only for police arrests, but for police killings. And my students are old enough to really start being able to reflect on that and are being impacted by that. So being able to ask them questions like, what are, compare and contrast the protests and the storming of the Capitol on the 6th to what we saw happening over the summer. What are some of the things that could make this society more fair and equitable? What are some of the impacts of having police in schools? Does that create more safety, or does it cause more Black students to be arrested while at schools? Does it cause things that should be disciplinary issues to turn into legal matters? Those are some of the questions that we're able to ask, and I think that some of the policymakers need to ask also. I am pretty much adamantly opposed to any policing in schools because of the message that it sent, police at schools, the message it sends to students, and the effects on discipline. What are our disciplinary policies that suspiciously mimic the criminal justice system, where it's offense, crime, and punishment? And why do we see some of the disparities in discipline for Black and Latino students versus white students? Why do we see some of the disparities in special education between Black and Latino students and white students? And what trickle effect does that have down the line to the opportunities that they're afforded afterwards, the able to access AP classes. They're able to the ability to get recommendations from their teachers that will lead them to college. So I think that a microscope has been put on the criminal justice system due to the Black Lives Matter movement, but it matters more than just when people are in the streets and wondering why this police car has been circling the neighborhood, every day for the past 5 years. It matters in the way that policies affect students and their ability to learn, and whether or not they're allowed to be in the classroom or outside the classroom.
So you brought up a good point, and this is a great transition point to the next question. But I'll just jump in really quickly, because you talked about your feelings towards policing in a school, and how that kind of shapes and molds and has an effect on students and their thought processes. The school district that I work in now, just last year, implemented the police force, and so our district has, I believe at this point, we only have one officer. Last year we had two, and it was really interesting. Our police chief in our school district is a white man. His second in command, I suppose, the other officer, has now moved on from the district. But he was a Puerto Rican man, I think, born and raised in New York. And so that was interesting to see even the difference between their behavior. One as a white male police officer, one as a Hispanic police officer who's worked in Philly and Jersey, and how they operated differently, but also the initial reaction to having police in the schools. And even, I won't share too many details because, the forum, but there were instances that I witnessed altercations with students and police that were unfortunately disproportionately negative, especially with those minority students. In fact, I can say it like this. I saw zero negative physical interactions between a white student and a police officer, whereas I saw several students who were at least placed in or who were restrained, who were minority students. And so, there is so much that goes on when thinking about police in schools. And I get it. It's a safety concern. We want our students to be safe because we know the world is crazy and things are crazy and people are crazy. But to what end? And if we're thinking about Maslow, going back to the hierarchy of needs, which I shared on the screen, I don't know if anyone saw it earlier, but for those of you who are not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but you cannot learn if you or don't feel safe. And so how many people in their daily lives fear for their lives because of altercations with family members from police, from their own instances at their homes with police? How many people fear for their lives when they interact with police? And then you introduce that into a school building, and that's an automatic trigger for a lot of traumatic and negative emotions. And so that is unfortunate, because then again, you are pushing back someone's learning process and impeding their learning. And so you talked, Cyril, about policies, and there was a question from Stephen. Here you go. What policies should we implement to address the psychological stress of both COVID-19 and the pandemic, as well as potentially systematic racism on students of color? Cyril, would you like to jump in?
Yeah. There's kind of a lot of things going on. I'll address the pandemic first, because there's a lot of kind of things going on in Baltimore and in Chicago. There are very important competing needs where there's a difference between kind of the teachers and administration and in the school board about when it's safe to re-enter the school. I would say this regarding COVID, that everybody wants to be in the building. Teachers, students, like they want it, they need it. There's a lot of students who don't have that sense of relatedness when they're at home, because not only was the school their social space, it was their safe haven, it was the place where they are able to connect with the adults that can speak to them, that could nurture them, that could inspire them, and it's difficult to do within a virtual setting. Like you can't give someone DAP over the screen, and teachers are trying their best.
This does not work the same way. It just doesn't.
One of my favorite things to do when I'm not either counseling a student or testing a student, I walk the hallways during transitions. I check in with students throughout the day, even the ones that I'm not that I'm not officially assigned to be working with. It's part of becoming a community. And with regards to the pressures of systemic racism, I think that we should assume that students are looking at the world with their eyes open. A lot of times we, let me not generalize, but you can make the assumption that students are ignorant of the world around them and what's going on around them, but when there's a massive protest outside of the White House, the students are seeing it on the news, they're seeing it on social media. You got to be able to have that conversation with them and talk to them about what's going on in the world, and not mimicking those same systems within the school. Right. I mentioned that a lot of times our school discipline can look like what happens when you break the law outside of school, and right. Exclusionary discipline, suspensions, expulsions. That is basically taking the lessons from the judicial system and trying to apply it to students, rather than building a safe community of growth where, if your school has a police officer there, SRO, student resource officer, do they have a counselor, a psychologist, a nurse? Are the students able to get their basic needs met? When a teacher sees a student that is angry and having difficulty, is your first call to that police officer. There's so much stress that students are under that, like I mentioned, for a lot of students, school is not a rewarding place. And the students who have behavioral problems, they're pegged as the bad kid. Right. One of the things that I've worked in a school for 5 years, and I got to see the growth, not just from month to month and week to week, but year to year, and being able to see a student who was, throwing kids on the ground and body slamming them in second grade. By the time he's in sixth grade, he's able to use the talents and the skills that he has within the classroom. And yes, sometimes he does have anger problems. Sometimes he does have difficulty with self-regulation. And his sixth grade teacher doesn't know what he was like in second grade, right, and the tremendous progress that he's made. I think that it's incumbent on everybody who works in the school to be able to build the school in a community, into a community which is valued by students and teachers, where emotions are talked about on a daily basis, where when there are behavioral incidents, that those situations are repaired and not just punished. And that student is restored back to being a valued and seen as a viable, valued member of that community by themselves, by their peers, and by the teachers, and not just, I've got my eye on you, you have a behavior plan, let's start gathering data so we can put you in the program for students who
identify you as this. Exactly.
There's, even if there's not a formal label, in a lot of teachers' minds, that label is on that kid. There's so many ways that, as we're thinking of going back, how do we treat a student who is having difficulty wearing a mask all day because they're just the fidgety students?
Right.
Do we start suspending students for that? Do we say, oh, no, you're not allowed to be in the classroom. You have to do virtual learning. If we're not careful, and I'm not huge into the idea of implicit bias, but the way that a lot of teachers, studies have shown that they have difficulty interpreting the emotions of Black and Latino students. Like just being able to look at their face and processing what emotion they're feeling. There's something about their perception being off. The inability to understand how they communicate anger. Does a teacher know the vernacular of the community that they're serving and know when the student is having an appropriate expression of frustration and when they're being disrespectful? And those kinds of judgment calls often come at the expense of Black and brown students.
Right. Wow. There's so much to unpack, and I feel like we could be here for another 6 years talking about because every time another topic comes up, another thought comes up, and then there's so much more to think about, and the conversation is endless. And so, Cyril, we have time for one final question, and this comes from Brian Johnson. Do you think there is a solution to changing the pipeline for Black, brown, Latino, minority teachers? Is there a solution to changing that field, to integrating more educators like that? What are your thoughts?
I think that it goes back to what I said, brought me into the education field in general. At some point, I saw that the schoolhouse was a place of value. And I think that the more we can, there's the Malcolm Gladwell book Outliers, where it talks about a lot of people take away from that the 10,000 hour rule, where it takes 10,000 hours in order to master something. But that's actually not the point of the book. One of the points of the book is that for all of these people who had talent, who was able to dedicate themselves, they got that break to be able to see where to apply their skills. I think that the more that we can put students in a position where they see schools as a place of value and can identify like there's this one teacher, this teacher believed in me. This teacher helped make me who I am. This teacher gave me my break. They were, when I got in a fight, they were the teacher that sat down and talked to me instead of immediately asked for me to get a 10-day suspension. They were the teacher that inspired me through their lesson. They were the teacher that introduced me to this realm of education that I've never heard of before. I think that connecting students with their schools, connecting them with their education, not just while they're in school, but beyond that, you had help along the way. How can you feed back into the next generation? And it might not just be through teachers, through being mentors, through being coaches. I think that's a big part of it. And I think that the other thing is just in society, seeing teachers as people who are people of value, who are people who how many teachers are not only working during school but after school hours, on the weekends, and we use the narrative of teachers are heroes, therefore we expect them to sacrifice, but teachers are heroes, therefore we're going to honor them through not cutting their salary, not cutting their budget, not forcing them to come out of pocket for classroom expenses. I think that when teachers are viewed and treated as valuable as doctors and lawyers, and students are able to go through school seeing people who look like them pouring back into the community and being treated with the respect that they deserved. And I say this, not as a teacher. I have a fancy title, and I've got a doctor in front of my name, but the teachers are the organs that keep the school moving, and we should treat them as such, and we should make sure that we're honoring them appropriately with their respect, and administrators not viewing them as the adversary.
Right.
Parents, talk to your students about, these are the kinds of impacts that a teacher can have. What are some things that that you want to give back to that? I think it's a multifaceted solution. If I had the solution, I think that I'd be in higher education rather than working on the ground. I know that for me, what caused me to go into education instead of doing something like, starting a private practice or working for an organization was reflecting on my own, upbringing, and seeing education as one of the linchpin ways of building up the community. And maybe that's it. Building the communal aspects, the communal ethos within our students, that you're not just an individual trying to attain the American dream, but when one of us succeeds and we all succeed, and when we're able to speak back to the neighborhood, speak back to the community, and be that person that propels it forward. It's the community ethos that drove Black Wall Street. It's a community ethos that drove movements for freedom and rights.
Agreed.
Educator,
Retweet,
psychologist.
I'm
7 days a week. We.
As a matter of fact, and you said, Cyril, that like a lot of teachers are working, on weekends, and I was literally working today. Right before we started the broadcast, I got done at 2:30, 3 o'clock. I got done with work, jumped right on here. While I was at work, I saw one of my students. So it just, this is not, and there's still that relationship, and it's kind of cool to see students outside of and see their actual lives and how they live outside of how they react in the classroom. Because again, people are people, and so people are going to act differently in different spaces. And so, I think that this is just all encompassing and a conversation for forever.
Yeah. Like I said, I could talk about this for a long time. I'm grateful that the representation among teachers is a point of emphasis. I'm grateful to teacher education programs who are building in diversity and inclusion into their educational training programs. I'm grateful to those who are teachers now who are actively recruiting, Black and brown teachers. I think that, things like that, apprenticeship programs, making, streamlining, teacher certification programs, and helping people see that this is a cause worth fighting for. This is a viable option for you, and it's something that helps build the foundations of the community and propels everybody forward. I think that there's that has gone and will go a long way to building more diversity in our teaching ranks.
I agree. Well, I think before we end up being here all day, every day, Cyril, this is a great place to end the show. Cyril, thank you so much for joining. And again, a big thank you to Dr. Kristin Austin, who was with us. It had to go a little bit ago, but Mr. Campbell has something else to add for you there, Cyril, just as a reminder for you.
I love seeing your updates on Facebook about the Maya kids. I still have some connection with Maya Angelou, the school where I did my internship. Still in contact with my old supervisor there. In fact, I just saw him yesterday, and it's great to see. Mr. Campbell, if I could talk him up a little bit more, that's a model of what a lot of urban educators and educators in majority Black and brown students do, that they're not just in the classroom, but they're in the lives of the students, and the students see that and they value that. And it's an example of what makes somebody a great educator. It's why a lot of teachers burn out, but it's the it's the thing that it's a passion, it's a calling, it's something that that wakes us up the next morning to want to come into school despite some of the difficulties. So
as much as I want to walk out every day.
There's and this is the last thing I'll say. I was at a convention last year before COVID started, a conference where I was going to different workshops, and I kind of broke them out down into 3 categories. Some of them were for application, things that would come in on Monday and change the way I practice. Some of the sessions were for aspiration, things I aspire to do a year, 2 years down the line, and some of them were for inspiration. What wakes me up the next morning? What's going to keep me in the fields 10 years down the line?
Amen. I love it. Cyril, thank you so much for joining the show today. This has been an amazing episode. I'm so glad we got the chance to have this conversation. So thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chandler. Anytime. You know how to get in contact with me. Appreciate you, big man. Thank you. And this has been another episode of AfroLatinos, our first live episode. So thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you for joining us. We look forward to doing this again. You can check the formal broadcast if you did not get to watch the live. Of course, you can catch us on our Facebook page, which is AfroLatinos. You can find us on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcast, anywhere, all of that fun stuff. You can also find us at our YouTube channel, AfroLatinos. So check us out, like, subscribe, comment. Thank you to everyone who has been a part of our show today. This has been your co-host, Aubyn. Yeah, no, Cheney, you forgot.
I should probably unmute myself for this one.
This has been your co-host, Aubyn.
And Chandler.
Goodbye, everyone.